is the MacBook Neo and I've been using it every single day for about 3 months now. When Apple first showed it off, the whole tech world kind of lost it. Because for the first time in years, you could buy a real Mac for under 600 euros. And ever since, people online have split into two camps. One side calls the Neo the most important Mac since the M1 Air. The other side says a laptop with a phone chip and just 8 gigs of RAM will be a chunk in 2 years. I started out somewhere in the middle, and after 3 months of real daily use, I can finally tell you which side is closer to the truth. So if you're thinking about buying the Neo, stick around, because by the end of this video you will know exactly if it's right for you or if you should spend your money somewhere else. Let's start with the thing that matters most to me on any laptop, and that's the build quality. A laptop isn't something that just sits on your desk. I carry it around the apartment all the time. I open and close it 100 times a day and I type on it for hours. And in this price range, between 500 and 600 euros, this is usually the first place where companies cut corners. You will get plastic that cracks, bends, and just feels cheap. With the Neo, there's none of that. The body is cut from a single block of aluminium, and when I held it right next to the expensive MacBook Pros, the build felt pretty much the same. That's kind of wild when you think about the fact that there are a few thousand between these two. But the real beauty of this shows up over time. On cheap plastic laptops, the palm rest gets shiny and warm after a few years. The hinge starts to wobble and you will see every scratch right away. I know an aluminium Mac handles that way better, because my own M1 MacBook Pro is 5 years old now and still looks almost new. That's exactly why I'm pretty sure the Neo will still look great a few years from now too. Apple even nailed the hinge so well that you can open the lid with one finger without the whole thing lifting up. That sounds like a small thing, but no other laptop in this price range pulls it off this cleanly. Now let's talk about the screen, that part where you spend the most time looking at. And here Apple made some smart choices about where to save money and where not to. It's an LCD, not an OLED, and it doesn't have a high refresh rate either. But the display is bright, the colors look good, and most of all, it's really sharp. Text and icons look super clean, and honestly, you notice that in daily use far more than any numbers on spec sheet. There are two things I have to mention though. The Neo doesn't have a notch anymore, which a lot of people love at first. The small catch is that the menu bar at the top now sits inside the actual picture, while on the more expensive MacBook it kind of lifts up in the notch now. That's nitpicking for sure, but you should still know about it. The keyboard and trackpad are where it gets interesting. The keyboard feels pretty much exactly like a MacBook Air when you type on it, and that's high praise. What's missing is the backlight, and honestly, that's a strange choice, because the exact people the Neo is made for are the ones who'd need the backlight the most to see the keys in the dark. If you touch type, you will barely miss it, everyone else will. The trackpad is its own story. It doesn't have force touch anymore, so it clicks the old classic way, with a real mechanical click instead of the little vibration on the pricier models. But the glass surface itself and the way your finger glides across it are just as good as on any other current MacBook, and better than on pretty much any Windows laptop. You only really notice the difference in the moment you click. Apple helped itself out here with a clever bit of engineering, so the click feels equally firm and clean everywhere on the trackpad. It doesn't feel bad, it just feels a little more old school than on the pricier MacBooks. And that exact feeling, not bad, just a bit old, comes up a few more times with this device. With the ports, Apple saved money too. You get 2 USB-C ports and a headphone jack. But only one of these 2 USB-C ports is actually fast. and there's no Thunderbolt at all. For me in daily use, that was never a problem, because I don't plug in super fast external SSDs or 5K monitors. But if that's exactly what you plan to do, you should know. One detail a lot of people don't know is the thing with the fingerprint sensor. On the cheap base model with 256 gigs, Apple left out Touch ID. On my model with 512 gigs, Touch ID is on board. And honestly, I don't want to live without it anymore. You just rest your finger on it for a second and the Mac is unlocked. That's simply nice in daily use. And for me, it's another good reason to go straight for the bigger version. The webcam is solid, it's nothing amazing, but it's totally fine for video calls and even better than on some older MacBooks. What makes a huge difference in daily use is that I just plug the Neo into an external monitor through the faster of the two USB-C ports. As soon as it's hooked up to a bigger screen, this small, cheap laptop turns into a full workstation. And that's exactly when a proper keyboard and a good mouse really start to make sense. That's the point where I turned my Neo into a real-life workstation. Let's talk about the performance in everyday use. Inside there's the A18 Pro, the same chip as in an iPhone 16 Pro. That sounds like a compromise at first, but in practice it's surprisingly strong. In all those comparisons against Windows laptops at the same price, the Neo makes the competition look pretty slow when it comes to raw speed, especially when only one program really needs the power. In real life, that means browsing YouTube, email, office work and jumping between a lots of apps. All just feel smooth. I often put the Neo right next to the much pricier MacBook Pro, and for these everyday things I could barely see a difference. Sure, when you're exporting videos or editing big photos, the more expensive machine is faster. But most people simply don't do that every day. I'll be honest about the weak spots too. In the first few days, while the Neo was setting everything up, pulling photos from the cloud and installing apps, it felt a bit slow here and there. That went away completely after a few days. And since then, it runs smooth. But it's the first time in a long while that I had the dough with a Mac, that it feels just a tiny bit old in some moments. It's not bad, it's just not quite as effortless as the expensive models. And that brings us to the biggest point of debate of all, the 8 gigs of RAM. Online, you constantly read that 8 gigs is way too little these days, and that the Neo will be e-waste soon because of it. I see it differently, and for one simple reason. People said the exact same thing about the M1 MacBook Air, and that thing still runs great 6 years later. It really depends on what you do. In my everyday use, browser, a few tabs, mail, Notion and music on the side, I never run into a wall. macOS is also built to use the RAM as fully as possible on purpose. So you shouldn't let the raw numbers scare you. The honest point is still that there is a limit. If you're the kind of person who keeps 15 apps open at once while sitting in a video call, you will bring the Neo to its knees. For everyone else, and that's the biggest majority, 8 gigs is generally enough for daily use. There's one thing you have to understand, and it ties directly into the storage I will talk about next. When the RAM fills up, macOS moves data onto the drive. That only works really well as long as there's enough free space there. And that's where it gets interesting. This brings us to the point that, for me, is the most important buying decision on the whole Neo: the storage. The base version comes with just 256 gigs, and combined with the 8 gigs of RAM, that's actually the setup I'd warn you about the most. Because once the drive fills up, the system loses the exact space it needs to move data around. And then the Neo starts to feel slow. That's why I went for the 512 gig version on purpose, and for me that's the one upgrade that's truly worth it. With double the storage, I never once had the feeling in 3 months that I was running out of space or speed. So if there's only one place you can put a bit more money, put it right here and nowhere else. With the battery I get about 8 to 10 hours of normal use, which easily gets me through a workday. On top of that, there's something easy to overlook. The Neo has no fan, which makes it completely silent. No hum, no spinning up. Just nothing, especially when you're focused on work or relaxing on the couch in the evening. That silence is really nice. One point that gets too little attention in a lot of reviews is repairability. For a cheap device, that's really important. Many laptops in this price range are glued shut and basically can't be repaired. So they are e-waste at the moment something breaks. The Neo is the complete opposite. It's not only the most repairable Mac in years, it's one of the most repairable laptops out there. Almost every part can be swapped, and Apple even sells the spare parts directly through its own repair store. For a device that often goes to school kids, students and beginners, that's a huge and often underrated plus. But the Neo's biggest advantage over all the competition is something else anyway. It's a real Mac and runs the full macOS. Unlike an iPad or a Chromebook, you can install and use every Mac app, and that's exactly what it makes so much more flexible in daily life. That leaves the question of how long Apple will keep the Neo updated. Honestly, nobody can say that for sure. What I think is realistic is that the Neo will be supported a bit shorter than the real expensive models. But for most people who just want to use a device for many years, that's not a big deal, as long as the basics keep working. So, what is my honest verdict of the 3 months? And here I land like a lot of other people, somewhere in the middle between the two camps. The Neo is for me one of the most important Macs in years, because Apple is finally going after the budget market for real and making exactly the right compromises while doing it. With the body, the display and the battery, the places where cheap laptops usually fall apart. Apple didn't cut corners. The cuts happened with things like the keyboard, backlight and the brightness sensor. And those are things most people can live with just fine. The interesting part is that a lot of these compromises don't feel bad. They just feel a little old school. And the crazy thing is that Apple has made its own devices so good over the years that even this careful cost cutting still ends up feeling well though out. If you've been using a cheap Windows laptop or an iPad so far and you're looking for a real long-lasting computer for everyday life, you'll be really happy with the Neo. It's the perfect way into the Apple world. But if you can spend a bit more, it's also worth looking at a used MacBook Air with more RAM and a better chip, which you can often get for a similar price. Both are good choices, and which one is the right for you depends on what you really need. For me personally, with the 512 gig version and my totally normal day of office work, browsing and YouTube, the Neo is exactly the right device, and it's a keeper. If this review helped you with your decision, drop a like and let me know in the comments which setup you'd go for, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!